For billion years. That's how long life has existed on Earth. Bacteria, multiplying in primordial seas, jellyfish, pulsing through ancient oceans, dinosaurs, thundering across continents that no longer exist, redwood trees, pushing towards skies for 3,000 years, blue whales, singing songs that travel 1,000 miles underwater. Trillions upon trillions of species have emerged, flourished, and vanished into the fossil record. And in all that time, across every ocean and continent, under every possible condition that chemistry and physics allow, intelligence capable of civilization emerged exactly once. Just once in you, right now. As you listen to these words, you are using a brain that represents the most improbable outcome in Earth's history. The 1 point for kilograms of tissue inside your skull, folded into intricate patterns that somehow produce thought, and memory, and wonder. This required so many impossible accidents, such perfect timing, such absurdly specific conditions aligning in precise sequence, that mathematicians who study probability have calculated something disturbing. It will never happen again. Not probably won't happen again. Can't happen again. The window has closed. Consider what this means. 1 million species have evolved complex brains over the past 500 million years. Octopi, with nervous systems so sophisticated they have 9 semi-independent brains distributed through their 8 arms. Ravens, who solve puzzles that stump human children, who hold grudges and recognize individual human faces years later. Elephants, with social bonds so deep they mourn their dead and return to the bones of ancestors decades after death. Dolphins, with brain-to-body ratios comparable to humans, who give each other individual names and teach their young sophisticated hunting techniques that vary by region, like human culture. All brilliant, all capable of learning, teaching, communicating, feeling. But only one species learned to write symphonies that make strangers weep. Only one species sends robots to other planets. Only one species contemplates its own origin and builds telescopes to see the beginning of time itself. Why? What separates the human brain from every other complex nervous system that evolution has produced? And why, after 4 billion years of life generating every imaginable variation, did technological intelligence emerge in just one lineage? The answer isn't what you think. It's not that humans are smarter than other animals in some simple way. Octopi navigate mazes more efficiently than humans. Ravens outperform us at certain memory tasks. Dolphins communicate with syntax complexity that linguists are still trying to decode. Intelligence, in the broad sense, is actually common. Nature discovered clever brains dozens of times independently. What's vanishingly rare, what happened only once, is the specific combination of traits that enables civilization. And that combination required such precise timing, such unlikely events stacking upon one another, that the universe would need to run trillions of times over to produce it again by chance. Here's the scale of the improbability. Approximately 5 billion species have existed throughout Earth's history. According to estimates by Dr. Camilo Mora at the University of Hawaii, publishing in PLOS Biology in 2011, 5 billion distinct forms of life, each representing millions of years of evolutionary refinement. each adapted exquisitely to its environment, each the product of countless generations of natural selection favoring traits that enhanced survival. And from this vast multitude, from 5 billion experiments in what life can become, one species crossed the threshold from animal intelligence to civilization. The statistical ratio is roughly 1 in 5 billion. Those aren't lottery odds. Those are getting struck by lightning while simultaneously winning the lottery while being hit by a meteorite odds. But the improbability goes deeper. Life itself took approximately 500 million years to emerge after Earth's formation. Multicellular organisms took another 3 billion years to evolve. Complex animals with nervous systems appeared roughly 540 million years ago, during the Cambrian explosion. And from that point forward, brains have been evolving continuously along countless lineages. Millions of species with increasingly sophisticated neural systems. Millions of opportunities for intelligence to blossom into something more. Yet for 540 million years, through multiple mass extinctions that reset evolution's experiments, through ice ages and greenhouse periods and everything in between, through the rise and fall of trilobites and ammonites and dinosaurs and saber-toothed cats, nature never produced another species capable of algebra or agriculture, or asking why the stars exist. Evolution discovered eyes independently at least 40 times. According to research by Dr. Trevor Lamb at the Australian National University, flight evolved independently for times in different lineages. Insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats. Echolocation evolved independently 6 times. These are convergent solutions. Different evolutionary lineages discovering the same adaptive strategy. Because certain problems have optimal solutions. Flying requires wings. Seeing requires light-sensitive cells. When environmental pressures favor these capabilities, evolution finds them repeatedly. But technological intelligence? Once taught in for billion years of life frantically, experimenting with every possible body plan and brain structure once. This suggests something profound and unsettling. Either technological intelligence is not a convergent solution, not an inevitable outcome that evolution discovers given enough time, or the specific pathway that produces it is so narrow, so dependent on unlikely coincidences, that the odds of traversing it are functionally zero. You exist at the end of a sequence of events so improbable that if you could rewind Earth's history and let evolution run again from the beginning, the overwhelming likelihood is that for billion years later, the planet would be covered in life. Complex, diverse, beautiful life. But nothing would be wondering why it exists. No consciousness would be examining consciousness. No species would have mathematics or music or the capacity to feel existential dread about mortality. You are the exception, the cosmic accident, the result of probability's rarest occurrence. And here's what keeps astrobiologists awake at night. If we're trying to understand why we haven't detected alien civilizations, despite billions of galaxies each containing billions of stars. Maybe Earth provides the answer. Maybe the Fermi paradox dissolves not because civilizations destroy themselves, but because they almost never arise in the first place. Maybe the filters that prevent life from becoming technological are so severe, so unlikely to pass, that most planets remain forever populated by sophisticated animals who never quite cross the threshold. Intelligence is common, civilization is not. The universe might be full of planets with equivalents of dolphins and ravens and elephants, and utterly empty of beings capable of building radio telescopes. According to Dr. Anders Sandberg at Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute, who published Dissolving the Fermi Paradox in the Proceedings of the Royal Society in 2018, when you properly account for uncertainty in the variables of the Drake equation, the math suggests we might easily be alone in the observable universe, not just alone. The only consciousness asking questions about itself. Within 10 billion light years, your existence required events so unlikely that they shouldn't have happened. But they did happen. Once. And the question that will haunt the rest of this narrative is simple and terrible. Why can't it happen again? What changed? What door closed behind humanity that will never reopen? The answer begins 900,000 years ago, when your ancestors were dying, when the entire human lineage was collapsing toward extinction, when climate turned hostile and populations crashed, and everything that makes you human today was being forged in the crucible of near-death. The story starts not with success, but with the most catastrophic failure in human history. A failure so complete that it should have ended everything before cities, or writing, or agriculture ever existed. A bottleneck so severe that we're still living with its consequences today, written into every cell of your body. The thread of human consciousness almost snapped. The improbable accident almost ended before it truly began. And somehow, impossibly, 1,000 to 180 individuals refused to let it break. For most of human history, nobody knew how close we came to vanishing. Scientists suspected something had happened deep in our past, because the evidence was everywhere, if you knew where to look. Human genetic diversity is strangely low compared to other species. Chimpanzees, who exist in small, isolated populations scattered across equatorial Africa, have far more genetic variation than all 8 billion humans combined. That's backwards. Logically, a species numbering in billions should have enormous genetic diversity. We should represent thousands of distinct lineages, centuries of accumulated mutations creating significant differences between populations. But we don't. Genetically, humans are remarkably uniform. To humans selected randomly from opposite sides of the planet are more similar genetically than to chimpanzees from neighboring valleys in Tanzania. This uniformity whispered of bottleneck events, population crashes where most lineages died out, and only a handful survived to repopulate the species. But for decades, geneticists couldn't determine the severity or timing of these crashes. The signal was there in the DNA, but the tools to interpret it precisely didn't exist. We knew something catastrophic had happened. We just didn't know what, or when, or how bad it really was. Then in August 2023, Dr. Wang Zhu at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, along with colleagues Yishuan Pan and Haiping Li, published findings in Science Journal that revealed the full horror. Using a new computational method called FitCo, analyzing genetic data from over 3,000 individuals, representing 51 global populations. They reconstructed human population sizes going backward through time. And around 930,000 years ago, the genetic signatures collapse, not gradually. Decline. Collapse. Like watching a movie where suddenly 99% of the actors disappear from the screen. The numbers were so extreme that Dr. Wong initially thought his analysis contained errors. He spent years checking, recalculating, running alternative models. Every methodology produced the same result. Approximately 930,000 years ago, the human ancestral population crashed from perhaps 50,000 individuals to just 1,180 breeding individuals. That's not total population. That's the number capable of reproduction. Factor in children, elderly, and those who didn't successfully reproduce. And you're looking at maybe 2,000 people total. The entire future of humanity resting on a population smaller than a typical American high school. And it wasn't a brief crash. The population stayed at these critically low numbers for 117,000 years. Read that number again. 117,000 years. That's longer than modern Homo sapiens has existed as a distinct species for over 4,000 generations. Your ancestors clung to survival in numbers that biologists classify as critically endangered. For context, when African elephants dropped below 15,000 individuals, conservation organizations declared a crisis. When black rhinos fell to 2,500, experts predicted imminent extinction. But humans? We survived at 1,000 to 180 breeding individuals, for longer than most species exist at all, according to Dr. Wong's analysis. Published in his science paper, quote, "The population collapse was so severe it created genetic bottleneck narrower than any other known mammalian survival event. During this period, our ancestors lost approximately 98.7% of their genetic diversity. The implications are staggering. We can see in modern human DNA the molecular signatures of these 117,000 years. They shaped who we are today. Picture what this actually means. You're part of a small band of early humans. Maybe 30 or 40 individuals. Extended family groups bound by kinship and necessity. Your species doesn't have a name yet. Scientists will eventually call your lineage various things. Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis. Labels that mean nothing to you as you struggle through each day. Focused entirely on the immediate demands of survival. And your world is ending. Not in some dramatic catastrophe, not in a single cataclysmic event, but through slow, grinding environmental collapse that stretches across generations. Until nobody remembers what plenty felt like. The forests where your grandparents hunted. Where your parents learned to find honey and dig for roots are transforming into open scrubland. Then the scrubland withers. Within 3 or 4 generations, nothing remains but cracked earth stretching to horizons that shimmer with heat mirages. That promise water but deliver only empty sky. Rivers that flowed year-round. Reliable sources your people visited for countless generations become seasonal streams. Then even the streams dry up. leaving only channels marked by sun-bleached stones and the scattered bones of animals that once drank there but found nothing but dust. The air itself changes quality. Dust devils dance across barren plains, spinning columns of grit that sting exposed skin and force you to cover your face. The sky turns brassy yellow with suspended soil. When rare rains finally come after months of drought, they fall as violent storms that carve deep gullies but bring no lasting relief. The water vanishes into parched ground within hours, soaking down beyond reach, leaving only mud that cracks as it dries and returns to dust. This is the early Middle Pleistocene transition, a period when Earth's climate pattern shifted from relatively predictable 40-1-1000-year cycles to brutal 100,000-year glacial interglacial swings. Ice sheets in the northern continents grew massive, locking up so much water that sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet. The Mediterranean nearly dried up completely. Land bridges appeared connecting Africa to Eurasia. But it wasn't the ice that killed your ancestors. Most humans lived in Africa, far from glaciers. What killed them was what the ice did to African climate. When enormous ice sheets form in the northern hemisphere, they create atmospheric dams that disrupt normal weather patterns. The monsoons that once brought regular rains to Africa become weak and erratic. According to paleoclimate research by Dr. Peter Domenical at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, published in Science in 2004, African climate during this period underwent the most severe ridification event in millions of years. Woodland ecosystems that had supported diverse mammal populations for eons transformed into grasslands. Grasslands became scrubland. Scrubland became desert. And desert became nothing. Sterile landscapes where nothing could survive. The fossil record from this period tells the story in stark simplicity. Most large African mammal species went extinct. Antelope varieties that had thrived for millions of years simply vanished from the geological record. Elephant populations crashed. Predator numbers collapsed when their prey disappeared. And anything that depended on hunting and scavenging, like early humans, faced a brutal choice. Adapt to conditions unlike anything their species had ever experienced, or die. Most chose poorly, or rather, most didn't have the right combination of traits, the right technologies, the right social structures to adapt quickly enough. Human populations across Africa and beyond simply winked out. Sites that had been continuously occupied for hundreds of thousands of years show abandonment. The archaeological record from 950,000 to 650,000 years ago contains massive gaps. Entire regions where humans had lived for eons suddenly showing no evidence of habitation. This isn't because we haven't found the sites. It's because there were no sites. Those populations died. But somewhere in Africa, exactly where remains uncertain, one group survived. 1,000 to 180 breeding individuals found something others missed. Perhaps a mountain range that still caught enough rainfall to support a few trees. Perhaps an underground aquifer that kept springs flowing when everything else dried up. Perhaps a rift valley that created its own microclimate, protected from the worst extremes. We don't know the specific location. We may never know, but we know they survived for 117,000 years. Through conditions that should have killed them, they held on. And during those desperate millennia, something unprecedented occurred. When populations crashed to numbers as low as 1,000 to 180 individuals, evolution doesn't work the way it normally does. In large populations, genetic changes spread slowly. A beneficial mutation might take hundreds of generations to become common, gradually increasing in frequency as individuals carrying it have slightly better survival odds. Harmful mutations similarly take time to disappear, lingering in the gene pool for millennia. But in tiny populations, evolution moves at lightning speed. Beneficial traits can sweep through the entire group within a few generations. Harmful ones are eliminated just as quickly for 117,000 years. The ancestors of all living humans existed in an evolutionary pressure cooker, where every trait was tested mercilessly and only the most adaptive survived. The archaeological and genetic evidence shows exactly what this pressure selected for. Brain size increased dramatically during and immediately after the bottleneck period. Fossil skulls from before 900,000 years ago show cranial capacities averaging around 1,000 cubic centimeters. Specimens from after 600,000 years ago average approximately 1,000 to 100 cubic centimeters. That's a 20% increase in brain volume in just 300,000 years. For comparison, human brain size has barely changed in the 200,000 years since Homo sapiens emerged as a distinct species. According to Dr. Philip Reitmeyer at Binghamton University, who published comprehensive analysis in the Anthropological Papers of the American Museum of Natural History in 2004, this rapid brain expansion represents one of the fastest evolutionary changes in hominin history. He writes, "The rate of encephalization during the Middle Pleistocene, particularly following the population bottleneck period, exceeds rates observed in any other mammalian lineage. This suggests extraordinarily strong selection pressure favoring cognitive abilities, but larger brains alone don't explain human uniqueness. Neanderthals had brains averaging 1,500 cubic centimeters, larger than modern humans. Elephants have brains weighing 11 pounds compared to human 3-pound brains. Sperm whales have brains exceeding 19 pounds. Size matters, but it's not everything. What matters is how the brain is organized, what it can do, and crucially, how that brain connects with other brains through communication. Around 600,000 years ago, something changed in human vocal anatomy and neural wiring. A mutation occurred in a gene called FOXP2, what researchers call the language gene. This mutation affects the fine motor control of facial muscles and larynx, abilities essential for articulate speech. Dr. Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, who discovered the modern human version of FOXP2 and published his findings in Nature in 2002, describes it as a genetic change that specifically enhances the capacity for complex vocal learning. FOXP2 exists in many animals, including mice and songbirds, where it also relates to vocalization. but the human version contains two specific amino acid substitutions that appeared sometime in the last 600,000 years, in a population of millions. This mutation might have been lost to chance. Random genetic drift could have eliminated it before it spread widely. But in a population of 1,000 to 180 individuals, if the people carrying this mutation had even slightly better survival odds, because they could communicate more effectively, because they could teach complex skills more precisely, because they could coordinate group activities more efficiently, then within a few hundred generations, everyone would carry it. That's exactly what happened. Every human alive today has the same version of FOXP to think about what effective communication means for survival during desperate times. You discover a new water source after days of searching. Without complex language, you might lead your family back to it through memory and recognition of landmarks. With language, you can describe its exact location to everyone in your group, including precise directions and identifying features. That information can be shared with other groups you encounter. It can be taught to children who weren't present when you found it. Knowledge becomes portable, transmissible, cumulative. The advantage this provides compounds across generations. The archaeological record shows exactly when this communication revolution took effect. Stone tools from before 900,000 years ago exhibit enormous regional variation. Each population of early humans made tools in slightly different styles, using different techniques, favoring different shapes. These variations suggest limited communication between groups, with each population developing and maintaining its own technological traditions in isolation. But after 800,000 years ago, something changes. Tool designs become standardized. Similar implements appear across distances of thousands of miles. Techniques for creating specific tool types show remarkable consistency between regions. That shouldn't have had contact. Dr. Sally McBrearty at the University of Connecticut, who has studied African stone tool evolution for decades and published comprehensive analysis in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2007, interprets this standardization as evidence of cultural transmission becoming systematic. She writes, "The widespread appearance of similar tool technologies across disparate regions suggests information exchange networks of unprecedented sophistication. This is the signature of cumulative culture, where innovations spread rapidly and become adopted broadly rather than remaining local phenomena. Cultural transmission requires more than just communication. It requires teaching, the deliberate transfer of complex knowledge from expert to novice. Most animals learn through observation and trial and error. Young chimpanzees watch their mothers crack nuts with stones and eventually figure out the technique themselves after years of practice. But humans teach actively. We demonstrate techniques while explaining the underlying principles. We correct errors. We break complex skills into learnable components. We create practice scenarios where novices can develop abilities without life or death stakes. Dr. Michael Tomasello at Duke University, who has spent decades comparing human and chimpanzee cognition, and published his synthesis in the book The Cultural Origins of Human Cognition in 1999, argues that active teaching is what separates human culture from animal culture. Chimpanzees have local traditions. Different groups use tools differently, but these traditions spread slowly and often degrade over generations because transmission is imperfect, human. Culture accumulates and improves because teaching ensures high-fidelity information. Transfer. Each generation learns what the previous generation knew and then adds innovations on top of that foundation. During the bottleneck period, losing accumulated knowledge when an individual died could be catastrophic. If only 3 people in your group of 40 know where to find water during dry seasons, and all 3 die from disease or accident, everyone might die of thirst the following year. This creates enormous selection pressure for effective teaching. Individuals who were better at transferring crucial survival information to others, who had the patience and communication skill to ensure the next generation learned essential techniques. Those individuals' genes spread preferentially through the population. Over 4,000 generations, this selection pressure refined human teaching and learning abilities far beyond what any other species developed. By the time the bottleneck ended, human ancestors weren't just smarter individually, they were collectively intelligent in ways no other species could match. Knowledge was cumulative. Skills improved across generations. Innovations spread rapidly. And this created the foundation for something unprecedented. Cumulative culture that could eventually build pyramids and symphonies and space. Telescopes. But intelligence and communication still weren't enough by themselves. Another revolution was occurring simultaneously, one that literally freed energy for those growing brains to exist. The cooking revolution changed everything. Intelligence alone does not create civilization. This is perhaps the most important sentence in this entire narrative. So let it sink in for a moment. Intelligence alone does not create civilization. Octopi are remarkably intelligent, solving complex puzzles, using tools, demonstrating learning abilities that rival many mammals. Ravens remember human faces for years, hold grudges, teach their young sophisticated techniques. Elephants mourn their dead, maintain complex social relationships, demonstrate self-awareness in mirror tests. Dolphins use syntax in their communications, pass cultural traditions across generations, cooperate in ways that suggest genuine understanding of others' mental states. All intelligent, all capable. None built cities or invented agriculture or created written language. Why? The answer lies in understanding that human uniqueness doesn't stem from any single adaptation, but from an absurdly unlikely combination of traits that appeared together in one species within a narrow time window. Think of it like a combination lock with 6 numbers. Evolution has tried each number individually countless times across millions of species. Eyes evolved independently over 40 times. Flight for separate times. Echolocation 6 times. These are single numbers on the lock. But opening the door to civilization requires all 6 numbers in the correct sequence. And that happened once. Let's examine each number individually, then contemplate the probability of them appearing together. Number 1 is the energy budget solution. Big brains are expensive. Your brain consumes 20% of your caloric intake, despite representing only 2% of your body mass. That's an extraordinary metabolic burden. Most animals can't afford it. They need their calories for growth, reproduction, maintaining body temperature, fleeing predators. But humans solved this problem through a combination of adaptations that appeared in quick succession. We evolved eccentric sweat glands, 2 to 5 million of them covering our bodies, allowing evaporative cooling far superior to any other mammal. We lost most body hair to maximize this cooling efficiency. This allowed persistence hunting, running prey animals to exhaustion over hours in midday heat while they overheated. And we stayed cool. Dr. Daniel Lieberman at Harvard University, who published his analysis in Sports Medicine in 2007, calls this the endurance running hypothesis. He writes, "Humans are unique among primates in our ability to run long distances. This wasn't recreational. It was a hunting strategy that provided high-quality protein when other predators rested during the hottest parts of the day. But the cooling system that enabled endurance running also solved a different problem. It allowed brains to keep growing without overheating. Brain tissue generates enormous heat. Without efficient cooling, larger brains would literally cook themselves. The same adaptations that made us great runners made larger brains physiologically possible. Number 2 is throwing ability. This sounds trivial until you understand how mechanically difficult and evolutionarily unique accurate throwing is. Chimpanzees can't throw accurately. Their shoulder joints, designed for climbing and brachiating through trees, don't allow the rotation and leverage necessary for high-velocity projectile delivery. But human shoulders contain a unique configuration of ligaments and joint surfaces that permit a whip-like motion, allowing us to throw objects at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour with remarkable accuracy. Dr. Neil Roach at George Washington University, who published biomechanical analysis in Nature in 2013, demonstrates that this shoulder configuration evolved roughly 2 million years ago, coinciding with the emergence of Homo erectus. The advantage: hunting from distance. Instead of closing with dangerous prey animals and risking injury from horns or hooves, humans could kill from 30 feet away using thrown stones or spears. This fundamentally changed hunting success rates and reduced injury risk. No other predator hunts this way. We're the only species that weaponizes projectiles through muscle power alone. Number 3 is extended childhood. Human infants are born radically premature compared to other primates. A newborn chimp can cling to its mother's fur immediately. A human infant can't even hold up its own head for months. This seems like a terrible disadvantage, a design flaw, but it's actually a crucial adaptation driven by an ironic constraint. Our big brains and narrow pelvises, the narrow pelvis necessary for efficient bipedal walking, created a birth dilemma. Bigger brains meant bigger heads. Narrow pelvises meant smaller birth canals. Something had to give. The solution: babies are born earlier in development, before their heads grow too large to pass through the birth canal. Dr. Holly Dunsworth at the University of Rhode Island challenges the traditional obstetrical dilemma explanation in her research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2012. arguing instead that the timing of birth relates to maternal metabolic limits. But regardless of the ultimate cause, the result is this same human babies are helpless for years. This forced unprecedented cooperation. Mothers couldn't hunt and gather while carrying infants who couldn't cling and needed constant care. Other group members had to help provision and protect mothers and children. Dr. Sarah Huddy at the University of California, Davis, in her book Mothers and Others, published in 2009, calls this cooperative breeding and argues it was revolutionary for human evolution. She writes, "No other ape practices allomothering, non-parents investing in offspring, but humans require it. The helpless human infant created selection pressure for cooperation that extended far beyond parent-child bonds. It created truly cooperative groups where individuals invested in children they hadn't produced. The extended helpless period also created an unexpected advantage. Human brains remain plastic, continue developing outside the womb for years, while being shaped by cultural learning in ways impossible. If babies were born more developmentally advanced, your brain was still forming neural connections, still organizing itself until you were well into your 20s. This prolonged plasticity allows human brains to be sculpted by culture and experience to a degree unmatched in any other species. Number for is language capacity. We've discussed the FOXP to gene, but language requires more than just genetic predisposition. It requires specific vocal tract anatomy. Humans have descended larynges, voice boxes positioned lower in the throat than other primates. This creates a larger pharyngeal space, allowing production of a wider range of vowel sounds. Dr. Philip Lieberman at Brown University, who published his analysis in Current Anthropology in 2007, argues this anatomical change occurred gradually over the past 500,000 years. The descended larynx carries a dangerous trade-off. It increases choking risk. Humans are the only mammals that can't breathe and swallow simultaneously, making us far more likely to aspirate food and die. Yet this deadly disadvantage was worth it because the communication benefits were so enormous. Complex language allows not just sharing information about present circumstances, but discussing absent things, hypothetical scenarios, past events, future possibilities. This is displacement, talking about things not immediately present, and it's uniquely developed in human language. Number 5 is cooking. Raw food is hard to digest. It requires enormous digestive systems to break down tough plant fibers and raw meat into nutrients the body can absorb. Cooking changes the equation completely. Heat breaks down proteins and starches before they enter your body, performing external digestion that makes nutrients far more bioavailable. Cooked food can support a brain 60% larger than a raw food diet allows, according to calculations by Dr. Richard Wrangham at Harvard University, who published his groundbreaking analysis in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 1990-9. Number 6 is social scaling. Most primates hit what's called Dunbar's number, a cognitive limit on stable social relationships determined by neocortex size. For most primates, this limit sits around 50 to 150 individuals. but humans uniquely developed mechanisms to maintain cooperation beyond this natural limit. Now consider the improbability of these 6 adaptations appearing together. Each adaptation alone provides advantages, but none alone leads to civilization. Let's discuss actual mathematics, not philosophical speculation, but hard probability. What are the odds that technological intelligence evolved on Earth? Could it happen here again and across the observable universe? How likely is it that other civilizations navigated the same impossibly narrow path that created humanity? The numbers are chilling. They suggest we're not merely rare. We may be utterly alone. And if we're alone now, we'll likely remain so for as long as complex life exists anywhere. Dr. Anders Sandberg at Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, alongside Eric Drexler and Toby Ord, published groundbreaking research in 2018 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society. Their paper, Dissolving the Fermi Paradox, approaches this question with mathematical precision. They began with the Drake equation, that famous formula estimating technological civilizations in our galaxy. The equation multiplies several probabilities: star formation rates, planetary frequency, habitable zones, life emergence, intelligence development, technological advancement, and civilization longevity. For decades, optimistic scientists inserted high probabilities and concluded galaxies teem with civilizations. Carl Sagan estimated millions of technological species in the Milky Way alone. Sandberg's team did something revolutionary. Rather than using best guesses, they quantified the uncertainties surrounding each estimate. When you properly account for how uncertain we are about these probabilities, everything changes. Consider life's emergence probability on habitable planets. We have one data point, Earth. Life appeared within the first billion years. Quickly, some interpret this as evidence life emerges easily, but it could equally represent survivor bias. Perhaps life is extraordinarily unlikely, and we only observe rapid emergence because we exist to make the observation. If life typically requires 10 billion years to emerge randomly, and Earth is only 4.5 billion years old, we wouldn't expect average cases. We'd only observe early outliers. The only cases where intelligent life eventually evolves to ask the question. When Sandberg's team calculated all variables accounting for uncertainty, they reached a startling conclusion. The median estimate for Milky Way civilizations isn't millions or thousands. It's 0.00000002. Effectively zero. There's substantial probability we're the only technological civilization in the entire observable universe. Not just our galaxy, the observable universe. All 2 trillion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Their conclusion states that when we account for realistic uncertainty, we find substantial probability that we are alone in our galaxy, and perhaps even in the observable universe. This result dissolves the Fermi paradox. There is no contradiction if the expectation itself is flawed. Apply this thinking specifically to Earth. Could technological intelligence re-evolve here if humans vanished tomorrow? The constraints are severe. The sun is aging and brightening. In 500 million to 1 billion years, increasing solar luminosity will trigger runaway greenhouse effects. Oceans will evaporate. The surface will become a scorched wasteland supporting only extremophile bacteria in deep rock. 500 million years sounds vast, but evolutionary history provides context. Life progressed from simple bacteria to humans in roughly 3.5 billion years. The journey from bacteria to multicellular organisms alone consumed nearly 3 billion years. Complex animals with nervous systems emerged only 540 million years ago. During the Cambrian explosion, human-level intelligence emerged in the last few million years. Less than 0.1% of life's total history. If you erased complex life today and restarted with bacteria, the statistical likelihood of reaching human-level intelligence before Earth becomes uninhabitable is essentially zero. There's insufficient time to replay 3.5 billion years of evolution. In the remaining 500 million, humans occupy every niche where intelligence might plausibly re-evolve. Forests, savannas, coastlines, mountains, deserts, tundra, wetlands. Even if we vanished tomorrow, our infrastructure would persist for millennia. Dr. Jan Zalasevic at the University of Leicester, analyzing human geological impact in science in 2016, estimates human environmental signatures will remain detectable for millions of years in rock strata. Any species evolving toward intelligence would develop in post-human ecosystems radically different from the African Rift Valley environment where humans emerged. They'd encounter our ruins, introduced species, pollution, modified atmosphere. Evolutionary pressures would be entirely different. Would altered conditions favor intelligence development? Unknown. But they certainly wouldn't replicate the specific sequence producing humans. Lightning rarely strikes the same location twice despite billions of annual strikes worldwide. Earth's environments won't return to pre-human conditions for millions of years, if ever. The stage where humanity's drama unfolded no longer exists. You can't perform the same play on a fundamentally different stage and expect identical outcomes. Current atmospheric oxygen sits at 21%. During the Carboniferous period 350 million years ago, oxygen reached 35%, enabling giant insects and amphibians through higher concentration supporting larger body sizes. Earth's atmosphere reached current levels through specific historical sequences. Cyanobacteria producing oxygen through photosynthesis for billions of years. Plant colonization of land. Long equilibration periods balancing oxygen production with consumption through mineral oxidation. If oxygen levels dropped significantly, perhaps through marine phytoplankton collapse, rebuilding to current levels would require hundreds of millions of years minimum. Atmospheric conditions enabling large energy-hungry brains took billions of years to establish. That doesn't rebuild quickly, and Earth lacks billions of remaining habitable years. The fossil record provides sobering case studies of intelligence that came close, but never crossed the threshold. Homo erectus persisted nearly 2 million years, 10 times longer than modern humans. They had fire, stone tools, social cooperation. Their brains approached 1,000 cubic centimeters. They spread across Africa and into Asia, demonstrating remarkable adaptability. Yet for 2 million years, their technology barely changed. The same basic stone tool designs persisted across hundreds of thousands of generations. They never developed agriculture, created art, or invented writing. Around 100,000 years ago, they went extinct. 2 million years of evolutionary success, then nothing. What did they lack that humans possessed? Probably one or two critical adaptations. Perhaps limited language capacity. Perhaps social scaling hit ceilings. Perhaps they never achieved cumulative culture, allowing innovations to compound across generations. We'll never know exactly what was missing, but we know it was enough that 2 million years wasn't sufficient to cross the civilization threshold. Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans. They had sophisticated tools. They buried their dead with apparent ritual care, suggesting symbolic thought. They survived Ice Age Europe for 300,000 years. They even interbred with modern humans, proving genetic proximity to produce fertile offspring. Yet Neanderthals never developed agriculture despite surviving multiple climate cycles. They never created representational art appearing in Homo sapiens sites. From 40,000 years ago, their tool technologies, while sophisticated, remained relatively static over vast periods. Neanderthals got 5 numbers on the combination lock, 5 out of 6. It wasn't enough. They went extinct 40,000 years ago, when modern humans expanded into their territories. The difference between thriving and extinction came down to possessing that final adaptation. The mathematical probability of all these factors aligning again approaches 0. Earth got one shot at producing technological intelligence. That shot was us. The cosmic lottery doesn't give do-overs. The gulf between being intelligent and building civilizations is vast, wider than most people realize. It's easy to assume that sufficient intelligence automatically leads to technology, that smart animals inevitably discover agriculture and writing if given enough time. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Intelligence is relatively common in nature. Technological civilization is not. And understanding why some intelligent species remain pre-technological forever reveals exactly why human evolution was such an improbable accident. Let's examine the most intelligent non-human species currently alive and ask why. Despite millions of years of evolutionary opportunity, none developed anything resembling human civilization. What barriers did they hit? What adaptations did they lack? And does their failure to cross the threshold tell us something about how difficult and contingent that crossing actually is? Dolphins and their cetacean relatives have brains comparable in complexity to primates. The bottleneck dolphin brain weighs approximately 1,600 grams, larger than the average human brain at 1,350 grams. Dolphin brains show elaborate folding, high neuron density, and specialized regions suggesting sophisticated information processing. They demonstrate self-awareness in mirror tests. They use signature whistles functioning like individual names. They teach their young hunting techniques that vary by population, evidence of genuine culture. Mother dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, tear off pieces of sea sponge and wear them over their rostrums while foraging on the sea bottom. Protection against stinging organisms and sharp rocks. This sponging behavior is taught from mother to daughter, passed across generations as learned tradition. Dr. Lori Marino at the Camella Center for Animal Advocacy, who has studied dolphin cognition for decades and published comprehensive analysis in the Journal of Comparative Neurology in 2004, writes that dolphins possess all the cognitive markers we associate with higher intelligence: abstract reasoning, self-awareness, theory of mind, vocal learning, cultural transmission. In terms of raw cognitive capacity, they may be our intellectual equals, yet they will never develop technology as we understand it. Why not? The answer is physical embodiment. Dolphins have no hands. They live in an environment where fire is impossible. Water conducts heat too efficiently for combustion to be maintained. Without fire, there's no cooking, no metallurgy, no ability to transform materials through controlled heat. Without hands, there's no fine manipulation of objects. No tool creation beyond the crudest implements. Dolphins occasionally use objects as tools, carrying sponges for protection. But they can't create tools with precision or manipulate them with the dexterity human hands provide. Dr. Marino calls this the embodiment constraint hypothesis. Intelligence exists, but has no pathway to express itself technologically. Brilliant minds trapped in bodies that can't manipulate the physical world in ways that lead to cumulative technological development. The ocean itself creates additional barriers. Resource abundance in marine environments means dolphins never face the intense resource scarcity that drove human agricultural innovation. They hunt cooperatively, find food reliably in most conditions, and rarely experience the multi-year droughts or catastrophic food failures that forced humans to experiment with storing food, planning for future scarcity, and eventually cultivating crops. Intelligence evolved in dolphins to solve the problems dolphins face, navigating three-dimensional underwater environments, coordinating hunts, maintaining complex social relationships. But none of these problems require or lead towards civilization-building behaviors. Octopi are phenomenally intelligent, possibly the smartest invertebrates on Earth. They solve complex puzzles. They demonstrate playfulness, suggesting they think beyond immediate survival needs. They use tools, carrying coconut shell halves to hide in or assembling shells into protective barriers. They can navigate mazes, learn from observation, and plan ahead. Tests show they can unscrew jar lids from the inside to escape containers. They recognize individual humans and respond differently to those who treated them well versus poorly in previous interactions. Yet octopi will never develop civilization, and the reason is lifespan combined with solitary lifestyle. Most octopi live only 1 to 2 years. They're almost entirely solitary except during brief mating encounters. Mothers die after their eggs hatch, so there's no parental teaching period. Each octopus must learn everything from scratch through individual exploration and problem solving. There's no cultural transmission because there's no persistent social structure within which culture could be transmitted. Dr. Jennifer Mather at the University of Lethbridge, who has studied octopus cognition and published findings in the journal Animal Cognition in 2008, explains that octopi may be individually as intelligent as many vertebrates. But intelligence without culture cannot accumulate knowledge. Every generation starts from zero. Humans are not necessarily smarter than octopi individual to individual. We're collectively smarter because we build on what previous generations discovered. That cumulative cultural capacity requires long lifespans, extended parental care periods, and stable social groups. Octopi have none of these. The octopus case is particularly poignant because it demonstrates intelligence evolving completely, independently from the vertebrate lineage. The last common ancestor of humans and octopi lived roughly 600 million years ago, and almost certainly wasn't intelligent. Intelligence arose separately in mollusks and invertebrates. Strong evidence that evolution discovers clever brains repeatedly under different circumstances. But arising repeatedly doesn't mean inevitably leading to civilization. Octopi got intelligence without getting any of the additional requirements civilization demands. Ravens and other corvids present another fascinating case. Ravens solve multi-step puzzles. They cache food and remember hundreds of hiding locations. They plan for the future, selecting and storing tools they'll need for tasks hours later. They understand concepts like trading and value, exchanging objects with humans to get preferred rewards. They hold long-term grudges against individual humans who wronged them, and even share information about threatening humans with other ravens, creating shared cultural knowledge about which humans to avoid. Dr. Bernd Heinrich at the University of Vermont, who spent decades studying raven cognition and synthesized his findings in the book Mind of the Raven in 1999, describes their problem-solving as approaching primate levels. Despite vastly different brain architecture, bird brains lack the layered neocortex that mammals use for complex cognition. Yet ravens achieve similar cognitive results through different neural organization. More evidence that intelligence can be implemented in multiple physical substrates. So why don't ravens develop civilization? Partially, its physical form again. Wings are modified forelimbs, so birds have only feet for manipulation. Raven feet are dexterous compared to most birds, capable of holding objects and performing simple manipulations. But they lack the precision and strength of human hands. They can't create complex tools or build elaborate structures beyond nests. But more fundamentally, ravens hit Dr. Robin Dunbar's social scaling limit. Raven social groups rarely exceed 100 individuals. They maintain sophisticated social bonds within these groups, tracking relationships and reputations. But they never developed mechanisms to scale cooperation beyond natural group sizes, the way humans did through language and abstract institutions. Without large-scale cooperation, you can't have division of labor, can't have specialization, can't have the economic complexity that supports technological development. Ravens are brilliant within their ecological niche, but that niche doesn't create selection pressure for the kind of large-scale cooperative behaviors that enable civilization. Elephants present yet another angle on intelligence without civilization. They have enormous brains, the largest of any land animal at around 5 kilograms. They demonstrate self-awareness, empathy, grief, long-term memory, and social complexity rivaling primates. Elephant matriarchs maintain mental maps of territories spanning hundreds of square miles, remembering water source locations that might only be accessible once every few years during droughts. They recognize and respond to the bones of deceased herd members years after death, suggesting they maintain concepts of individual identity that persist beyond death. Dr. Cynthia Moss, who has studied African elephants for over 40 years and published her findings in numerous scientific papers, and the book Elephant Memories in 1988, describes elephant societies as complex matriarchies, where knowledge passes from elders to youngsters through decades of learning. Yet elephants remain hunter-gatherers essentially, browsing vegetation across their ranges without ever developing agriculture or permanent settlements. Why? Success means no pressure to change. These case studies from living species demonstrate that intelligence alone doesn't inevitably lead to civilization. The specific pathway to civilization is so narrow that simply having intelligence and millions of years isn't sufficient. You need the exact right combination of traits, pressures, and circumstances. And that combination existed once, in one lineage, during a narrow window that has now closed. Even after surviving the bottleneck, even after evolving all 6 critical adaptations, humans remained hunter-gatherers for nearly 200,000 years. Think about that. 200,000 years. Modern Homo sapiens emerged approximately 300,000 years ago. But agriculture didn't begin until around 10,000 BCE. That's a gap of 290,000 years of wandering, hunting, gathering. Why did it take so long? And why did agriculture suddenly emerge in multiple locations around the globe almost simultaneously? The answer reveals yet another impossible accident, another cosmic roll of the dice that had to land perfectly for civilization to exist. Agriculture didn't emerge because humans suddenly got smarter. The cognitive capacity for agriculture existed for hundreds of thousands of years. What was missing was the right environmental conditions. And those conditions appeared once, briefly, due to climate circumstances that may never repeat. Around 15,000 years ago, Earth was locked in the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets to miles thick covered North America and northern Europe. Sea levels were 300 feet lower than today. The climate wasn't just cold, it was violently unstable, swinging rapidly between different states, like a drunk driver weaving across lanes. Then around 14,700 years ago, the climate began warming rapidly. This warming phase created relatively stable conditions for nearly 2,000 years. Humans adapted. Populations grew. Life got easier. But then something catastrophic happened. Around 12,800 years ago, the warming suddenly reversed. Temperatures plummeted back to near glacial conditions in what's called the Younger Dryas period, named after an Arctic wildflower that suddenly reappeared in European fossil records. As the cold returned, imagine that shock. 2,000 years of warmth, stability, growth, then suddenly the Ice Age returns. This cold snap lasted 1,000 to 100 years, before ending abruptly around 11,600 years ago, when temperatures shot up again to warm conditions that have persisted relatively stably. Until now, the Younger Dryas was catastrophic. Dr. Ofer Bar-Yosef at Harvard describes how human populations in the Middle East had been thriving. During the warm period, they'd built permanent structures. They'd been harvesting abundant wild grains. they'd started to settle down. Then the cold returned. Wild grain distributions collapsed. Megafauna went extinct or migrated. Hunter-gatherer strategies that had worked for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly failed. Food became scarce. People were starving. This created unprecedented pressure to experiment with food production rather than just food. Collection. When wild grains became scarce, desperate human groups began deliberately planting seeds, tending plants, ensuring more reliable harvests even if overall productivity declined. This wasn't an obvious innovation. In fact, it was a terrible deal. Hunter-gatherers typically have better nutrition, work fewer hours, experience less disease than early farmers. Archaeological evidence is brutal. When humans transitioned to agriculture, average height decreased, dental health worsened, disease burden increased. Agriculture was harder work producing worse nutrition than hunting and gathering. It was a downgrade in almost every way. But agriculture had one advantage that mattered when you're starving: predictability. Wild food sources disappear unpredictably. Weather changes, animals migrate, plants fail. Cultivated foods, while requiring backbreaking labor, provide reliable yields. In stable climates, this advantage doesn't matter, but in unstable climates, with frequent crop failures and animal die-offs, reliability becomes everything. Groups pushed into marginal areas during the younger Dryas cooling, areas where hunting and gathering barely kept people alive, needed every possible advantage. They experimented with cultivation out of pure desperation. And those experiments succeeded just as the climate stabilized, allowing agricultural techniques to spread rapidly. Here's what's remarkable. Agriculture emerged independently in at least 7 locations around 10,000 BCE. The Fertile Crescent, where wheat and barley were domesticated. China, where millet and rice cultivation began. Mesoamerica, where corn, beans, and squash formed the foundation. The Andes, where potatoes and quinoa were domesticated. Sub-Saharan Africa, where sorghum and yams were cultivated. New Guinea, where bananas and taro were grown. Eastern North America, where sunflowers and squash were domesticated. These independent origins span from 11,000 to 4,000 years ago, but most clustered tightly around 9 to 10,000 years ago, the period immediately following the Younger Dryas crisis. This synchronicity across continents, with zero contact between populations, is stunning. It wasn't coincidence. It suggests agriculture wasn't the inevitable outcome of human intelligence gradually progressing. It was a desperate response to specific environmental conditions that created pressure for innovation simultaneously worldwide. The climate forced humanity's hand, and those conditions created more than just agriculture. They created genetic changes that persist in your body right now, today. As you're reading this, the shift to agricultural lifestyles imposed brutal new selection pressures, and human evolution responded with shocking speed. Over just 10,000 years, a blink in evolutionary terms, humans underwent adaptive changes we can trace in modern populations. The most famous example is lactose tolerance. Most mammals stop producing lactase, the enzyme that digests milk sugar, after weaning. But approximately 7,500 years ago in Northern Europe, A mutation appeared, allowing continued lactase production into adulthood. Dr. Mark Thomas at University College London traced this mutation's explosive spread through ancient DNA samples. The advantage was enormous. Milk is portable protein, providing nutrition when crops failed or hunting was poor. Individuals carrying the mutation could extract full nutritional value from dairy products. Better nutrition, better health, more surviving children. The mutation spread like wildfire. Within just a few thousand years, it reached near fixation in Northern European populations. Today, if you have Northern European ancestry, there's 90% probability you carry this mutation. But if your ancestors come from East Asia, where dairy farming never became important, the probability drops to 10%. You can test your own evolutionary history simply by drinking a glass of milk. If you digest it easily, you carry a gene that didn't exist 8,000 years ago. Your body is living evidence of natural selection operating in historical time. Another example is even more dramatic. Tibetan altitude adaptation. The Tibetan plateau sits at elevations exceeding 13,000 feet, where oxygen concentration is 40% lower than sea level. Most humans suffer severe altitude sickness there. Prolonged exposure causes chronic mountain sickness, excessive red blood cell production that thickens blood dangerously, leading to strokes and heart failure. But Tibetans have lived at these altitudes for thousands of years without problems. They possess genetic variants in the EPAS1 gene that regulate hemoglobin differently, maintaining optimal oxygen delivery without overproducing red blood cells. Dr. Rasmus Nielsen at UC Berkeley discovered something shocking about these variants. They didn't originate in Homo sapiens. They came from Denisovans, the archaic human species that interbred with modern humans around 50,000 years ago. When modern humans first moved into the Tibetan plateau, they carried genes suited for low-altitude living. Those who interbred with local Denisovan populations acquired genetic variants that had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years of Denisovan adaptation. Natural selection strongly favored these variants in the new environment. Today, 87% of Tibetans carry the Denisovan EPAS1 variant, compared to only 9% of Han Chinese at lower elevations. If you have Tibetan ancestry, your blood carries oxygen differently than most humans. Using genetic code inherited from species that went extinct 40,000 years ago, ancient ghosts live in your cells, enabling your body to function in conditions that would kill most people. This is human evolution occurring not in millions of years, but in thousands. Rapid adaptation driven by radical environmental challenges. The agricultural revolution also brought devastating costs. Skeletal remains from 15,000 years ago show humans averaged 5 feet 9 inches for males, 5 feet 5 inches for females. By 5,000 years ago, after millennia of agricultural dependence, average heights had dropped to 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet respectively. Agricultural diets provided sufficient calories to support larger populations, but nutritional diversity collapsed. This entire 10,000-year burst of innovation, this transformation from wandering hunter-gatherers to settled farmers to civilizations, occurred during a period of unusual climate stability. The Holocene epoch has been remarkably stable compared to the preceding 100,000 years of Ice Age chaos. This stability allowed agriculture to succeed where it would have failed in variable climates. The agricultural revolution depended on climate conditions that existed once and may never repeat. Now we arrive at the central question posed in the title of this narrative. Why can't it happen again? Why is human evolution a one-time occurrence that won't repeat? The mathematics are unambiguous. The probability of another species following a similar pathway to technological civilization on Earth approaches zero. Not metaphorical zero, actual zero when you account for the constraints. Let's examine each constraint, systematically understanding that what happened once in 4 billion years won't happen again in the time remaining, Earth's remaining time as a life-supporting planet is finite and insufficient for a complete re-evolution of intelligence. The sun ages continuously, growing gradually brighter as helium accumulates in its core from hydrogen fusion. This increasing luminosity will eventually trigger runaway greenhouse warming on Earth. Current models by Dr. Jack O'Malley James at the University of St. Andrews estimate Earth has approximately 500 million to 1 billion years remaining before surface temperatures exceed survival thresholds for complex life. The oceans will evaporate. The surface will become a scorched wasteland, incapable of supporting anything more complex than extremophile bacteria in deep rock layers. 500 million. Here sounds vast to human perception, but evolutionary history provides sobering context. It took roughly 3.5 billion years for life to progress from simple bacteria to humans. The journey from bacteria to multicellular organisms alone consumed nearly 3 billion years. Complex animals with nervous systems emerged only in the last 540 million years. During the Cambrian explosion, human-level intelligence emerged only in the last few million years, less than 1/10% of life's total history on Earth. If you erased all complex life today and started over with bacteria, the statistical likelihood of reaching human-level intelligence again before Earth becomes uninhabitable is effectively zero. There simply isn't enough time to replay 3.5 billion years of evolution in the remaining 500 million. The oxygenation of Earth's atmosphere required billions of years of photosynthetic cyanobacteria producing oxygen, while Earth's crust simultaneously absorbed it through oxidation of iron and other reactive minerals. Only after the crustal rocks became fully saturated with oxygen could free oxygen begin accumulating in the atmosphere at concentrations high enough to support large aerobic organisms. That's not a process you can accelerate. It's geology operating at geological timescales, determined by the total quantity of reactive minerals in Earth's crust and the rate at which oxygen-producing organisms could multiply. The atmospheric conditions enabling creatures with high metabolism brains required this specific multi-billion-year history. You can't rebuild those conditions in a fraction of the original time. Humans currently occupy every ecological niche where intelligence might plausibly re-evolve. Even if humans went extinct tomorrow through some catastrophe, we would leave a fundamentally and permanently altered planet. our infrastructure would persist as ruins for tens of thousands of years. Most dramatically plastic materials will remain in the environment for hundreds of thousands of years, possibly millions, breaking down into progressively smaller microplastic particles, but never fully degrading into simpler organic compounds. Dr. Jan Zalasevic at the University of Leicester estimates that human environmental signatures will remain clearly detectable for millions of years. Even if every human vanished tomorrow, the stratigraphic signal of human activity, including novel minerals, modified sediment patterns, fossil fuel combustion products, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, and globally distributed plastic particles will persist as a permanent marker in Earth's rock record. Any species attempting to evolve toward intelligence in post-human environments would be developing in ecosystems radically different from the African Rift Valley settings where humans emerged. They would encounter our ruins, our introduced species, now feral and established. Our chemical pollutants are modified atmospheric composition with elevated carbon dioxide levels that will take hundreds of thousands of years to return to pre-industrial concentrations. The evolutionary pressures would be entirely different. These altered conditions might favor certain adaptations, but they wouldn't replicate the specific sequence of environmental challenges that produced humans. Consider it this way. Lightning rarely strikes the same location twice, despite billions of lightning strikes occurring globally every year. Earth's environments won't return to pre-human baseline conditions for millions of years, if ever. The stage where the human evolutionary drama unfolded no longer exists. Evolution doesn't repeat itself precisely, even under similar conditions, because it involves too many random contingencies. Under radically different conditions, repetition becomes impossible. Current atmospheric oxygen levels sit at 21%, the concentration that enabled the evolution of large animals with energy-hungry brains. During the Carboniferous period 350 million years ago, oxygen levels reached 35%, enabling giant insects with wingspans exceeding 2 feet because higher oxygen concentrations could support larger body sizes. If oxygen levels dropped significantly, rebuilding to current levels would require hundreds of millions of years minimum through gradual biological and geological processes. The atmospheric conditions enabling large brains took billions of years to establish. And critically, Earth doesn't have billions of years remaining in its habitable window. The timeline doesn't allow for atmospheric reconstruction, followed by ray evolution of complex life, followed by emergence of intelligence. We're living in the twilight of Earth's viability for complex organisms, not the beginning or middle, but the final chapter. And in that final chapter, there isn't time for intelligence to emerge again from primitive precursors. The fossil record provides case studies illustrating how difficult crossing the threshold to technological intelligence actually is. Homo erectus persisted as a species for nearly 2 million years. 10 times longer than modern humans have existed. They possessed fire, stone tools, social cooperation, and brains approaching 1,000 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than earlier hominins. They spread from Africa across much of Asia, demonstrating impressive adaptability to diverse environments. Yet for 2 million years their technology barely changed. The same basic hand axe designs persisted across hundreds of thousands of generations. They never developed agriculture, never created representational art, never invented writing systems or mathematics. Then approximately 100,000 years ago they went extinct. 2 million years of evolutionary success, and they never crossed the threshold to civilization. They had 5 of the 6 critical adaptations, but whatever they were missing to million years wasn't sufficient time for evolution to provide it. Neanderthals present an even more striking example. They possessed brains averaging 1,500 cubic centimeters larger than modern human brains. They had sophisticated tool-making techniques requiring careful planning and skill. They buried their dead with apparent ritual care suggesting symbolic thought. They created jewelry from eagle talons and perforated shells, evidence of aesthetic sense and personal ornamentation. They survived in Ice Age Europe for 300,000 years, far longer than modern humans have existed, demonstrating remarkable cold weather adaptations. They even interbred successfully with modern humans, proving they were genetically compatible enough to produce fertile offspring. Yet Neanderthals never developed agriculture despite surviving through multiple climate cycles. They never created the elaborate representational cave art that appears abundantly in Homo sapiens sites from 40,000 years ago onward. Their tool technologies, while sophisticated, remained relatively static over vast time periods compared to the rapid innovation characteristic of early modern human archaeology. Neanderthals got 5 numbers on the combination lock correct. They were intelligent, social tool using, fire controlling, and symbolically aware. But they lacked something, probably enhanced social scaling capacity and cumulative cultural transmission mechanisms that prevented them from crossing into civilization-level society. And 300,000 years wasn't enough time to evolve whatever they were missing. They went extinct 40,000 years ago when modern humans expanded into their territories, bringing marginally superior technologies and more effective large-scale social organization. The difference between thriving and extinction, between remaining in the fossil record and building civilizations that send robots to Mars, came down to possessing that final critical adaptation. Close isn't sufficient. You need all 6 numbers in the correct sequence, and getting 5 out of 6 means extinction, not civilization. These examples demonstrate that simply having intelligence, long evolutionary time, and most prerequisites isn't sufficient. The final steps to technological civilization are extraordinarily improbable. The gap between sophisticated animal intelligence and civilization-building intelligence is vast. It requires the perfect storm of adaptations, environmental pressures, and timing that occurred once in 4 billion years and won't occur again in the time remaining before Earth's habitable period ends. The window opened briefly. Humans passed through. Now it's closing behind us, and no one else is coming through. So what does it mean to be impossible? To exist as the product of coincidences so unlikely they shouldn't have occurred. To carry in your cells the genetic legacy of ancestors who survived against mathematical probability. These aren't rhetorical questions. They have answers grounded in genetics, anthropology, and the simple fact of your existence right now. Every human alive descends from the same 1,000 to 180 bottleneck survivors who lived 930,000 years ago. Every single person. The genetic evidence is unambiguous, traced through mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosomes, and autosomal markers that converge on that tiny ancestral population. Dr. Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza at Stanford University, who spent 5 decades mapping human genetic diversity, found something remarkable. If you sample genetic diversity from 2 separate troops of chimpanzees living in adjacent valleys, you would find more genetic variation between those 2 chimp groups than exists between a person of Norwegian ancestry and a person of Chinese ancestry. We are astonishingly, almost absurdly similar. All humans share 99.9% identical DNA. The 0.1% difference accounts for all variation in height, skin color, facial features, and every other trait that makes individuals visibly distinct. We're barely different at all because we all descend from a population so small. That genetic diversity was catastrophically reduced and has never fully recovered. When you see someone who looks different from you, you're observing superficial adaptations. 2 different ultraviolet radiation levels and temperature ranges that occurred in just the last 60,000 years, as modern humans spread from Africa into diverse climates. These are recent cosmetic adjustments, evolutionary paint on a chassis that's fundamentally identical. Underneath the surface variations, their brain works identically to yours, firing neurons through the same networks, processing information through the same cognitive architecture. They carry the same bottleneck genes, the same FOXP to mutation enabling complex language, the same sweat gland adaptations, the same extended childhood requiring cooperative childrearing. The conflicts between groups, the wars over territory and resources, and ideology, the prejudices and hatreds that divide humans, these are recent cultural developments. Historically shallow patterns overlaid on a species that is fundamentally unified at the biological level. If you trace your family tree backward through time, you reach a convergence point. Go back approximately 3,400 generations, roughly 100,000 years, and you reach the common ancestor of all living humans according to statistical modeling by Dr. Douglas Road admit. Every person on Earth, all 8 billion current inhabitants, descends from individuals who were alive in Africa during that period. Your family tree and the family tree of someone living on the opposite side of the planet in a culture utterly different from yours, those trees merge and become one tree when you go back far enough. You are cousins, not metaphorically, but literally separated by only a few thousand generations. Go back further to 930,000 years ago to the bottleneck itself, and the family tree narrows to those 1,000 to 180. Survivors who refused to surrender during 117,000 years of environmental hell. Every human today, all 8 billion of us, all the billions who lived and died before us, all the billions yet to be born, all trace lineage to that tiny population dot. We are not just related. We are expressions of the same improbable survival story. You carry their resilience in your genes, their cooperation instincts, their teaching drive, their capacity to adapt to impossible circumstances. These aren't metaphorical inheritances. These are actual genetic sequences, physical molecules of DNA passed unbroken through 930,000 years. Think about what this means for how we organize our societies. We fight wars between nations. We maintain borders and immigration restrictions. We categorize ourselves into ethnic groups and treat these categories as fundamental divisions. We discriminate based on skin color or facial features or geographic ancestry. But these divisions are illusions, recent historical constructions with no biological basis. The genetic differences between a Swedish person and a Nigerian person are negligible, far smaller than the differences between individual Swedes or individual Nigerians. We've created elaborate social structures around distinctions that are essentially cosmetic. But there's only one type of human. We're all the same recent species, all carrying the same ancient legacy, all equally improbable products of the same evolutionary miracle. The Aboriginal Australians, whose ancestors reached that continent 50,000 years ago. The Europeans, whose ancestors survived the Ice Age. The Polynesians, who navigated thousands of miles of open ocean, settling remote islands. The Native Americans, whose ancestors crossed into the Americas during the last glacial period. All of these populations developing in isolation for tens of thousands of years, creating distinct languages and cultures, all carry genes from those 1,280 bottleneck survivors. All emerged from the same ancestral crucible. All represent humanity's collective achievement, not the superiority of one group over others, but the success of our species as a whole. There is no them in any biological sense. There's only us. One family recently diverged, carrying the same improbable heritage. When you look at another human, regardless of how different they appear superficially, you are looking at someone whose ancestors survived the same disasters your ancestors survived, who carry the same adaptations for language and cooperation and abstract reasoning. The person you're tempted to dismiss as foreign or other or fundamentally different is your cousin separated from you by nothing more than a few thousand generations of geographic isolation. This has profound implications when nations go to war. They're organizing violence between branches of the same family. When we create economic systems that benefit some groups while impoverishing others, we're distributing the collective inheritance of bottleneck survivors unequally, based on arbitrary historical circumstances rather than any inherent differences in capability or worth. When we restrict migration and maintain borders, we're preventing family members from moving freely across a planet that belongs equally to all descendants of those ancient survivors. This doesn't mean creating functional societies is simple or that borders serve no purpose. But it does suggest that our default assumption should be unity rather than division, cooperation. Rather than competition, shared destiny. Rather than zero-sum conflict. You are currently alive during the only period of Earth's history when technological intelligence exists here. Think about that timeline. Earth formed for 0.5 billion years ago. Life emerged approximately 3.5 billion years ago. For 3.5 billion years, life existed without consciousness examining itself without any organism asking why it existed or where it came from. Then 930,000 years ago, the bottleneck occurred, and the refinement process began. That would eventually produce brains capable of wonder and curiosity. 200,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens emerged. 10,000 years ago, agriculture began. 5,000 years ago, writing appeared. 70 years ago, we sent the first artificial satellites into space. You exist during the thin slice of time, the cosmic instant, when Earth's matter has organized itself into patterns capable of understanding its own origins and contemplating its place in the universe. This is not guaranteed to be permanent. Civilizations can collapse. Species can go extinct. Earth will eventually become uninhabitable. The window of consciousness might be brief in cosmic terms, perhaps only a few thousand or tens of thousands of years total between the emergence of technological intelligence and either its transcendence into something we can't currently imagine, or its extinction, leaving Earth silent again for the remaining hundreds of millions of years. You happen to be alive during the window. You are conscious during the age of consciousness. You are aware during the brief period when awareness exists on this planet. Before you, 3.5 billion years of unconscious life. After you, potentially hundreds of millions of years of either silence or something so different from current humanity that we can't meaningfully predict it. But right now, in this moment, you are here, experiencing the impossible, living as a statistical miracle that emerged once and won't repeat, carrying in your cells the genetic echo of ancestors who refused to surrender when surrender was the rational choice, thinking thoughts that no other matter in the observable universe might be thinking. You are not separate from this story. You are the current chapter of this story, the living endpoint of 4 billion years of contingent accidents that somehow produced minds capable of understanding their own contingency. And in that understanding, however briefly it persists, there is something profound. Something that justifies the long journey from simple cells to conscious beings, who can look backward through time and recognize the improbability of their own existence with wonder and humility and gratitude for the accident of being alive. 4 billion years is difficult to comprehend, to hold in your mind as anything more than abstract number, but try for a moment to feel the weight of that duration. If you compressed Earth's entire history into a single 24-hour day with formation occurring at midnight and the present moment at the following midnight life would appear around for in the morning, single cells just beginning to metabolize and reproduce in warm, shallow seas. For most of the day, nothing but bacteria. Multicellular organisms wouldn't emerge until 8:30 in the evening. Complex animals with backbones and nervous systems. Creatures that could move and see and respond to their environment wouldn't appear until 11 at night. Dinosaurs would rule from 11 to 11:40 p.m. The entire human lineage, from first upright apes to this present moment, occupies the final 90 seconds before midnight. Agriculture begins in the last second. Everything you learned in history, plus every civilization you've heard of, every recorded event, every written word happens in the final tenth of a second. And yet in that microscopic sliver of time, consciousness emerged, turned inward, began asking questions about itself, began seeking answers in fossils and genes and mathematical models, began telling itself stories about where it came from and contemplating what it means to exist briefly in a universe so vast and so indifferent. The story you've heard isn't really about the past, though it reaches back nearly 1 billion years. Through genetic evidence and fossil records and climate reconstructions, it's about the present, about this moment, about the extraordinary fact that right now, as you listen to these words as neurons fire in precise patterns, inside your skull generating thoughts about thoughts, you are experiencing something that exists nowhere else in this solar system, and possibly nowhere else within thousands of light years of Earth. The peculiar recursive state of being aware that you are aware, of having thoughts about your thoughts, of remembering the past and imagining futures and wondering whether your existence carries meaning. In a universe so vast that entire galaxies are barely visible as faint smudges through our most powerful telescopes. These capacities, wonder and curiosity and self-reflection are gifts, or perhaps burdens of being descendants of those 1,000 to 180 survivors who refused to vanish quietly into extinction. They are the inheritance of bottleneck, genes refined through 117,000 years of desperate selection pressure. They are the result of 6 critical adaptations appearing together in perfect sequence during a narrow window that has now closed permanently. You didn't choose to be impossible. You didn't earn consciousness through any action or merit. You simply are by accident of birth the current expression of a process that began before continents had names, or oceans had depths we could measure. There is no destination to this story, because the story continues in you. In every person alive, in children not yet born who will carry forward the genetic thread that somehow survived 930,000 years of near extinction, and climate chaos and ice ages, and every disaster that should have severed it. The human lineage stretches backward through time like an unbroken thread. You can trace from your parents to their parents through countless generations of ancestors, each one surviving long enough to reproduce, each one passing forward the improbable combination of genes that makes consciousness possible. And that thread extends forward into futures we cannot predict, toward outcomes we cannot control, but which will be shaped by choices of beings like us, the only beings like us. The only beings who can make choices while simultaneously being aware they are making them and contemplating the implications of their choices, and wondering whether their choices matter in the vast indifference of cosmic time. You are in this moment a temporary node in a network of consciousness that spans the planet. 8 billion human minds, each one a unique arrangement of matter that somehow impossibly produces thought and feeling and self-awareness, each one carrying genes from the bottleneck survivors, each one capable of language and abstract reasoning and wondering why anything exists at all, each one temporary human lifespans measured in decades, while geological ages measure in millions of years, but each one precious precisely because of that fragility and temporality, because consciousness is rare beyond measure, because the universe spent 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang creating conditions where matter could arrange itself into patterns, capable of wonder. And here you are, wondering, aware of your awareness, thinking about the improbability of thinking. The bottleneck survivors didn't know they were special. They were simply trying not to starve, trying to find water in drought, trying to protect their Children in a world that was actively hostile to their survival. They couldn't have imagined descendants would build pyramids and cathedrals and space stations orbiting Earth. They couldn't have conceived of symphonies or particle accelerators, or theories explaining how curved space-time produces gravity. They were just humans struggling and hoping and teaching their children survival techniques, in the way humans have always done. But the thread held. Through ice ages and volcanic eruptions and plagues and predators and climate chaos, through every conceivable disaster that could have broken it, the thread of consciousness passed from one generation to the next. Like a candle flame carried through darkness, protected carefully, never quite extinguishing, despite countless close calls. And now that flame burns in you, your thoughts, your memories, your capacity to feel wonder at your own impossible existence. These are not common features of matter in the universe. These are vanishingly rare, precious beyond any value we can assign. Perhaps that's enough, perhaps this simple knowledge of your own unlikelihood, your connection to billions of ancestors who survived against mathematical probability, your membership in the only species Earth may ever produce, capable of contemplating its own origin, perhaps that knowledge doesn't require any particular response or urgent action. Perhaps it simply exists as fact, strange fact, wonderful fact. You are here. You are aware. You are the universe examining itself through these particular temporary arrangements of atoms that will dissolve eventually, but which exist now in this moment, conscious and curious. And that is in itself extraordinary, not because it leads somewhere, not because it means something beyond itself, but simply because it is. Because against all odds impossibly you exist. The details matter less now than the pattern they reveal. The pattern of life persisting through obstacles, adapting to challenges, finding pathways forward. Even when paths seem closed, and sometimes rarely producing something unexpected, something that looks upward at stars and asks why they shine, something that creates beauty for no survival reason except that beauty moves us, something that cares about truth and seeks understanding even when understanding serves no practical purpose. Something that survived because ancestors learned to cooperate and teach and build knowledge across generations until knowledge became vast enough to comprehend its own origins. Something that can look back through time and trace its lineage. Through bottlenecks and extinctions and environmental catastrophes and see clearly how improbable this moment truly is. The thread continues through you, through everyone, connecting deep past to present to unknown futures. A story still being written by beings who can write their own stories, who can choose within constraints what comes next, but who also must accept the profound mystery at existence's heart. Why there is something rather than nothing. Why consciousness emerges from matter. Why we care about questions that have no answers. These mysteries remain even after we've traced our lineage back through bottlenecks and adaptations and for billion years of evolution. Perhaps some questions exist not to be answered, but to remind us of the strangeness of being alive at all. You are part of something impossibly large and impossibly old, temporary expression of a pattern that has persisted through unimaginable time, here, now alive, now conscious, now human, now carrying within you the legacy of every ancestor. Whoever lived impossible, improbable, real. You are connected to all who survived impossible odds to bring you here. Part of the final chapter of Earth's conscious phase, extraordinary and ordinary simultaneously, unique and universal here now. Alive, aware, human, impossible home. For this brief moment you are the universe looking back at itself, wondering, marveling at the beauty and terror and strangeness of it all. You are the impossible made real. The statistical zero that somehow became one. The accident that gained awareness and learned to ask why. And in that questioning, in that wondering, in that capacity to marvel at your own existence lies something worth preserving, something worth protecting, something worth passing forward to those who come after, so that the thread continues unbroken, so that consciousness persists, so that the universe continues to know itself. Through these brief flickering moments of awareness we call human life.